Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're taking a look at the intricate world of international organizations and regional trade blocs.
Those institutions and agreements, they're not just some abstract things, you know?
Yeah.
They have a real impact on businesses, consumers, even the balance of power between countries.
For sure. And we're going to unpack all of that. We've got a stack of reports and analyses here. I mean, let me tell you, it gets pretty dense.
No, yeah.
Our mission is to break it all down for you. The goals, the wins, the controversies, you name it.
And if we can connect all this to the bigger picture, you'll see how these institutions are always evolving, especially with new economic powerhouses, emerging and challenging the old guard.
Exactly. Okay, so let's start by laying some groundwork. Can you give us the rundown on multilateral organizations, those rule makers and referees of global trade?
Imagine a global rule book for trade.
Okay.
The WTO, or World Trade Organization, that's kind of like that rule book.
Uh-huh.
It evolved from an earlier agreement called GATT, and it covers everything from the clothes you wear to the music you stream.
Wow.
It aims to smooth out global trade, settle disputes, and ultimately improve living standards for everyone.
Sounds pretty ambitious.
Yeah.
But I've heard some criticism about the WTO, like favoring developed countries and maybe even being bad for the environment. What's the story there?
Well, those are some of the big debates surrounding the WTO. For example, some people argue that the most favored nation principle, where you can't play favorites among trading partners, could actually hinder developing countries from nurturing their own industries.
Interesting.
Imagine a small business in a developing country trying to compete with a massive multinational corporation.
Yeah.
That playing field, it's not exactly level.
No, for sure. So is it like one of those easier said than done situations? Trying to find that balance between free trade and protecting, those more vulnerable economies.
Exactly. It's a really complex issue with valid arguments on both sides.
Yeah.
And on the environmental front, critics argue that increased global trade can lead to more pollution and resource depletion.
Right.
Proponents, however, they say that the WTO can promote eco-friendly technologies and practices through trade.
Okay.
So there are
two sides to that story. Okay. So that makes sense. So moving on from the WTO, what about the IMF?
Yeah.
They're always in the news, right?
Yeah.
Usually stepping in to help countries facing, economic crises.
Think of the IMF, or International Monetary Fund, as the emergency room for countries with financial troubles.
Okay.
They provide loans when a country's balance of payments is in dire straits.
Right.
However, these loans often come with conditions.
Really?
We call them structural adjustments. Imagine it like this. A country's economy is in trouble, so they go to the IMF for a loan.
Okay.
But that loan comes with conditions.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a financial checkup.
Uh-huh.
But with some, tough love.
So what kind of tough love are we talking about here?
Well, these adjustments can involve things like budget cuts, privatization of state-owned companies, and currency devaluation.
Wow.
It's all aimed at getting the country's economy back on track, but critics argue that these measures can sometimes be too harsh and may not always consider the unique circumstances of each country.
Right. And what about this moral hazard argument?
Yeah.
The idea that countries might take more risks knowing that the IMF will bail them out.
Yes, the classic moral hazard dilemma.
Right.
Does the safety net of IMF bailouts encourage risky behavior?
Yeah.
It's a hotly debated topic with compelling arguments on both sides.
For sure. So before we move on to regional integration, are there any other multilateral organizations we should touch on?
Oh, absolutely. There's the World Bank, which focuses on development projects, and regional development banks like the Asian Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank.
Right. And what about those newer institutions like the BRICS New Development Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank? It seems like they're shaking things up a bit.
They certainly are. The landscape of multilateral organizations, it's constantly evolving.
Yeah.
With new players emerging and challenging the traditional, Western-dominated institutions.
Right. Okay, so we've got the big picture of these global players. Now let's zoom in on regional integration, where countries team up within a specific region to boost their economies.
Imagine a neighborhood coming together to share resources and improve everyone's lives.
Okay.
Regional integration, it aims for peace, stability, and wealth.
Right.
But there are various levels of cooperation involved.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Not at all. There are 5 main levels of integration, ranging from a simple free trade area like NAFTA to a full-blown political union like the EU.
Okay, so walk us through these different levels. How do things escalate from a simple handshake to a full-on economic merger?
Think of it like a ladder. The bottom rung, that's a free trade area where countries agree to lower or eliminate tariffs on goods traded among themselves. It's like opening up the borders for, easier trade.
Makes sense. What's the next step up?
A customs union, where in addition to free trade, they establish a common external tariff on goods coming in from outside the bloc. It's like having a unified front for dealing with the rest of the world.
So it's getting a bit more serious. What happens as we climb higher?
As we climb higher, we get to a common market, where on top of free trade and a common external tariff, you also have free movement of labor and capital between the member countries.
Wow.
This means people can work and businesses can invest, more easily across borders.
So it's becoming less about just trade and more about creating a unified economic zone.
Exactly. And the next level up is an economic union where member countries harmonize their economic policies, often with a shared currency, like the euro in the EU.
Wow, so that's like the ultimate level of economic integration.
Pretty much. And finally, at the very top of the ladder, you have a political union where countries essentially merge into a single political entity.
That's quite a journey, going from simply reducing tariffs to, merging into one. But I imagine there are benefits and drawbacks to each level of integration, right?
Absolutely. On the plus side, you have things like trade creation, where lower cost producers within the bloc can replace less efficient domestic producers. It's like finding a better deal within the neighborhood.
Yeah.
You also get economies of scale where businesses can tap into a larger market and produce more efficiently, leading to lower prices for consumers.
Sounds good for everyone. But what about those potential downsides?
Well, some people worry about job losses as companies relocate to areas with cheaper labor within the bloc.
Right.
And there are concerns about a loss of national sovereignty as countries have to surrender some control over their economic policies.
Oh.
Plus, you have the potential for trade diversion, where higher cost producers within the bloc end up replacing more efficient producers outside the bloc.
So it's a complex equation with a lot of factors to weigh. But now let's get down to the nitty-gritty and explore some specific examples of regional blocs, starting with the European Union, the poster child for integration.
The European Union, it's often seen as like the gold standard of regional integration. It's gone from a continent, ravaged by war, to a global economic powerhouse with a single market, free movement of people, and for many members, a shared currency, the euro.
It's amazing to think that so many different cultures and languages can come together under one economic umbrella. How did they pull that off?
Well, the EU's success can be attributed to a well-structured institutional framework that ensures a level playing field for businesses and, fosters economic cooperation.
Right.
A key pillar is the concept of the 4 freedoms, the free movement of goods, services, capital, and people across national borders.
It's like tearing down those metaphorical walls between countries.
Exactly.
And let's not forget the Schengen Agreement, which makes traveling between most EU countries incredibly easy.
Right.
No more border checks or passport control.
Exactly. The Schengen Agreement has significantly boosted trade, tourism, and cultural exchange within the EU.
Yeah.
However, it does present, challenges in managing external borders and security concerns, especially in a world dealing with migration and terrorism.
That makes sense. So let's talk about the euro. It seems like there's always debate about whether it's been a blessing or a curse for the EU.
The euro is a fascinating case study. On one hand, it's created price transparency and reduced transaction costs, making it easier for businesses to operate across borders.
Right.
But it's also led to economic disparities between member states.
Right.
Some argue that it restricts individual countries from responding to economic shocks with their own monetary policies. For instance, Greece's struggles during the sovereign debt crisis were partly attributed to the limitations of not having its own currency to adjust.
So a double-edged sword.
In many ways, yes. The Eurozone faces unique challenges because member countries need to coordinate their fiscal policies. And this can be tricky when countries have different economic needs and priorities.
Absolutely. And then there's the EU's competition policy, which aims to ensure fair play for everyone within the single market.
Absolutely. The European Commission, they play a vital role in ensuring fair competition. They scrutinize mergers and acquisitions to prevent monopolies, have strict rules against cartels and other, anti-competitive practices, and even keep an eye on state aid to make sure governments aren't unfairly favoring certain companies.
Right.
Remember the Google antitrust case? That's a prime example of the EU flexing its regulatory muscle to ensure a level playing field.
Okay, so the EU is a pretty complex beast. But now let's shift our focus across the Atlantic to North America. Tell us about NAFTA, which recently got a makeover and became the USMCA.
NAFTA, or the North American Free Trade Agreement, was designed to break down trade barriers and encourage investment between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico.
It was pretty controversial, with lots of heated debate about its impact on jobs and the environment.
Indeed. NAFTA was a hot-button issue. Supporters praised it for creating jobs in Mexico and lowering prices for consumers in the U.S. and Canada.
Right.
But critics argued that it led to job losses in the U.S. and Canada, particularly in the manufacturing sector. There were also concerns about environmental standards and the potential for companies to exploit weaker regulations in Mexico.
And those concerns ultimately led to NAFTA being negotiated under the Trump administration, right?
Precisely. The Trump administration pushed for a new deal that addressed U.S. concerns about trade deficits and the loss of American manufacturing jobs.
Right.
The outcome was the USMCA, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which included stronger labor and environmental provisions, as well as rules designed to boost the North American auto industry. For example, the USMCA requires that a higher percentage of a car's parts must be made in North America to qualify for tariff-free trade.
Interesting.
This was aimed at encouraging more auto production in the U.S. and Canada.
So is the USMCA a better deal than NAFTA?
That's a complex question.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer.
Right.
Some argue that the USMCA provides better protections for American workers and businesses.
Okay.
Others say it's a step towards protectionism and could harm consumers and businesses in all three countries by, increasing costs.
It seems like finding the sweet spot between free trade and protecting domestic interests is an ongoing challenge. But before we wrap up North America, can we touch on those other regional blocs in South America, Mercosur, and the Andean community?
These are interesting examples of regional integration efforts that haven't been as successful as the EU.
Right.
Mercosur, composed of Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, aimed to become a common market. However, progress has been slow, hampered by political and economic instability within the member countries.
And what about the Andean community? What challenges have they faced?
The Andean community, which includes Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, has aspired to become a customs union.
Right.
But, just like Mercosur, they've also struggled to achieve deeper integration.
Okay.
Both blocs demonstrate the difficulties of regional integration in regions grappling with weaker economies and political instability.
So they're not exactly the EU of South America.
Not yet. While they have reduced tariffs and increased trade between member countries, they still rely heavily on trade with countries outside their blocs, particularly the U.S. Their progress highlights the need for stable political and economic conditions to truly reap the benefits of regional integration.
Okay, so let's hop across the Pacific now and explore what's happening in the Asia-Pacific region with ASEAN and the potential rise of RCP.
ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, is a key player in the region, promoting free trade and cooperation among its 10 member countries.
Right.
They've made strides in reducing trade barriers and establishing a more integrated economic community.
And RCP is this mega trade deal that's been in the works, right?
Exactly. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCP, is a proposed trade agreement that would connect ASEAN with other major economies like China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand.
It sounds like a trade bloc on steroids.
If it comes to fruition, RCEP could become one of the largest trade agreements in history, encompassing a significant portion of the global economy and population.
Yep.
Imagine the potential for increased trade and investment across this vast region.
But I imagine there are some hurdles to overcome before this mega deal becomes a reality.
Of course. Negotiating a deal between so many countries with diverse interests is no easy task.
Right.
There are concerns about labor and environmental standards, as well as the potential for some countries to be left behind in the rush for economic integration.
It seems like a delicate balancing act. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the rule makers of global trade to the regional team players like the EU and ASEAN. But how does all this impact the world of international business? That's what I'm really curious about. Yeah. All right, so we've explored these multilateral organizations in these regional blocks, but let's bring it home. How does all this impact businesses that operate internationally?
For companies working across borders, these organizations and agreements, they create both exciting opportunities and complex challenges. Yep. It's a bit of a tightrope walk, but understanding the rules of the game, it's crucial for success.
Okay, so let's start with the good stuff. How can these institutions help international businesses thrive?
Trade creation. That's a major benefit.
Okay.
Regional trade agreements, like the EU's single market, can open up new markets for businesses by reducing or eliminating tariffs.
Right.
Think of a company that suddenly has access to millions of new customers without those extra costs.
Right.
That's a game changer. It can lead to increased sales and revenue, allowing companies to compete on a more level playing field with domestic producers in those markets.
It's like knocking down walls and welcoming a whole new wave of customers.
Exactly. Yeah. And with, expanded markets comes the potential for economies of scale.
Okay.
Businesses can produce and sell more, lowering their average costs per unit. That translates to higher profits and the ability to offer competitive prices, which benefits both the business and the consumer.
So that's a win-win all around.
Yeah.
What other perks come with playing on this international field?
Regulatory harmonization can make a big difference.
Okay.
When countries within a bloc agree on common standards for products, safety, and environmental protection, it streamlines operations for businesses operating across those borders.
Right.
Imagine trying to navigate a maze of different regulations in every country you do business in.
Oh, yeah.
It would be a logistical nightmare.
It's like having a universal adapter for your business, making it compatible everywhere.
That's a great analogy. It saves businesses time, money, and, a lot of headaches.
Yeah.
And in advanced cases like the EU, regional integration even allows for the free movement of labor and capital.
Okay.
Businesses can hire workers from other member countries and invest in new markets within the bloc with much greater ease.
But of course, it's not all smooth sailing.
Yeah.
Right? What are some of the challenges that businesses face in this globalized environment?
Well, competition. That's a major factor.
Okay.
When trade barriers fall, businesses face competition from companies within the bloc that they might not have had to worry about before.
Right.
Imagine a local bakery suddenly having to compete with a large chain that just entered the market.
Yeah.
It can be a tough adjustment.
It's like a whole new league of players entering the game. Businesses need to step up their game to stay competitive.
Absolutely. And this can be a positive force pushing businesses to become more efficient and innovative. They have to find ways to stand out and offer something unique to attract customers.
What about concerns that some businesses might, move operations to take advantage of lower labor costs in other countries within a bloc?
That's a valid concern. And it's something we saw happen with NAFTA.
Yeah.
The potential for job losses in certain sectors is a, real issue.
Yeah.
And it's something that governments need to address.
Right.
Policies that support workers and promote economic diversification.
Okay.
Those are key to mitigating this impact.
And then there's the issue of reduced government support. If a country is part of a regional trade agreement, they may have less flexibility to use tariffs or subsidies to protect their domestic industries.
That's true. Regional integration can limit a government's ability to directly intervene in the market.
Right.
But it also encourages businesses to become more competitive on a global scale. They have to rely on their own strengths and innovation rather than government assistance.
So it's about striking that balance between cooperation and competition, both for governments and businesses.
Exactly. As with any complex system, there will be winners and losers in the short term.
Yeah.
But the overarching goal of these institutions and agreements is to create a more stable, predictable, and prosperous global trading environment.
And for international businesses, that translates to a world of possibilities, but also one that demands adaptability, strategic thinking, and a deep understanding of the rules of the game.
Navigating this landscape is an ongoing process.
Yeah.
But the potential rewards are significant.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored the roles of multilateral organizations like the WTO and IMF, the varying levels of regional integration,
right,
the successes and challenges of different blocs, and the impact of all of this on international business.
It's a complex world.
It is a complex world, but hopefully this deep dive has helped you make sense of it all.
It's a fascinating and ever-evolving landscape, and I encourage you to, keep learning and exploring.
Now, before we sign off, we want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. We've talked about the established players, but what about the rise of new economic powerhouses?
Yeah.
How will countries like China, India, and Brazil reshape the future of multilateralism and regional integration? Will they challenge the existing order?
Right.
Or will they join forces to create a new era of global cooperation?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
The world is in constant flux, and these emerging players are likely to play a significant role in shaping the future of global trade.
For sure.
It's a story that's still being written.
So much to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've enjoyed exploring this intricate world of international organizations and regional trade blocs. Keep those questions coming, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.